So, at 18 years old, my parents booted me out of the house, essentially leaving me homeless. Well, a decade later, looks like the flows have turned, because now they're asking me for help. Ha! Joke's on them. This is exactly what I tell them. I'm 30 years old and a male. My parents did not really want children. I was an only child, and pretty much an accidental pregnancy from what relatives have told me, as my parents claimed that they were going to be child-free when they married. My childhood was initially good, but I think after I started growing out of the cute and adorable phase, my parents were less inclined to spend time with me. They both worked, had their own business that they started together. That business was their life, and it was always second fiddle to it. Any of the close family members, like my grandparents, lived states away. I barely knew anything about them till I was an adult. So I had no other family around my entire childhood. I was practically raised by television and my school teachers. My own birthdays, by the time I became a teenager, were often spent without my parents, as they just give me some money and tell me to go out and buy whatever I wanted. It was more or less the same thing with Christmas. Sometimes even back to school shopping. We wouldn't even have a Christmas tree after I turned 10, if it weren't for the fact that I convinced my parents to buy a fake one, and I could build it up and then take part every single year. If I were to describe my parents, think of them as those people who always wear black, drink lots of wine, and look down their noses at people. And the last I saw of my parents, they still looked and acted the same way. Although my father was always wearing a toupee now. When I turned 16, I asked my parents if I could work part-time at their business, and they just told me they had no open positions or anything like that. They may as well have just told me straight up that they did not want me there. After I turned 18, my parents told me that since I was an adult, they expected me to move out as soon as I could. I was working part-time because I was still in high school. I didn't have anywhere near enough saved for college, and not long after high school ended, my parents told me to pack up and move. They got an official eviction notice that gave me 30 days and everything. They didn't even help me move. I had to get help from a friend's dad who owns a truck. I ended up renting a crappy apartment and working retail. I had no real-life experience and no time for college. Then, after just a few months, I got fired because my manager legitimately had it out for me. Wrote me up for the stupidest stuff. I did not remember even what they were anymore, but I wasn't the only one the manager treated that way. I called corporate about it, and so did a few other people. Corporate looked into the manager, and they were soon fired for various reasons. Not many of which I actually knew, since it was most likely kept quiet. But someone told me theft of cigarettes was part of it. And the manager was a chain smoker. Corporate refused to rehire me and only said that they changed the records to say I was laid off instead of terminated, so my resume would still be squeaky clean. I guess they considered me damaged goods or something. I ended up going pretty broke fast, because I was terrible at managing my own money, and could not find steady employment. So I lost my apartment. I went back to my parents begging for help, but they refused to take me in. Not even for a little while, just to get back on my feet. I ended up homeless and living out of a tent in someone's backyard. In winter time. My friends had all moved to college, some in other states, and I was the broke kid taking whatever work I could do just to stay alive. Well, my salvation came when one of the neighbors of my parents found out I was living outside in a tent, and offered to take me in for a while so I would not freeze. She helped me badger my parents into telling me how to get in touch with other members of estranged family. My parents did not want to say. My guess is out of fear of being judged for throwing their son out the way they did. But they coughed up the info and gave me a list of contacts, and then told me never to bother them ever again. I called my grandparents from my father's side of the family, and they were very surprised and happy to hear from me, because they had not seen me since I was an infant, and I'm their only grandchild. My grandparents, after finding out my situation, flew me over to live with them as soon as they could. They basically adopted me. My parents did not even see me off at the airport, despite being invited. I had zero contact with them for pretty much a decade. My grandparents said they despised my parents for treating me so poorly and legally disowned them by striking them from their wills. My parents, I'm told, were not happy to hear that, but also said it did not really matter because they were plenty well off and did not need anything from my grandparents. How wrong that statement turned out to be. After about a year of living with my grandparents, I was able to afford to start going to community college. I got an associate's degree, got a decent job that makes good recommendations from my grandpa, and eventually my grandparents offered to sell me their house so they could retire to Arizona. My grandma wanted to live in a warmer climate as the cold winter was getting harder and harder on her health every year. I was sad to see them go, but I happily bought the house. They sold it to me for 1/3 its value, and I'll have it paid off within a few more years. My job has me going away on the road periodically, so I can end up away from home for weeks at a time. Not that I mind the travel. I have no pets, no girlfriend, anything like that. I would not have time for them right now. But in a few years, when I have something in order, I'll make time. I don't want to stay lonely bachelor forever. Then, one day, in late 2020, I came home after being away for over 2 weeks, only to find a large white van I did not recognize in my driveway. I was getting ready to call the police when I noticed the van had the logo from my parents' business on it. I felt dread. Yes, my parents were there, they'd broken in somehow, and were living out of my home. They had the nerve to greet me like we were buddy-buddy the moment I walked in. I told them to get the hell out. They refused because it was Grandma and Grandpa's house. I said it wasn't their house anymore. They sold it to me when they retired. They would have known that if they were in any way involved with my life. But they threw me out to the wolves 10 years ago with no experience. We argued and they refused to leave. My father told me it was his parents' house first, and that meant he and my mother had the right to live there if they wanted. I walked right into my bedroom, locked the door, and called the police. When the cops showed up, they were no help. My parents claimed to them that they've already been there long enough to have residency, which was a complete lie. But I had no cameras to prove they weren't there a month. My neighbors had no cameras either, so it was my word against my parents over how long they've really been there. They were claiming squatters' rights. They told police they had a verbal rental agreement with me and that I was trying to illegally evict them for no reason. My mother even put on the waterworks when saying that. The police told me it was a family dispute and to file eviction with the courts to get them out. And this was in 2020. Getting to court for anything took longer because of the pandemic. Meanwhile, my parents are squatting in my house, rent-free, and rubbing it in my face. From the information I got from them, their business went bankrupt and they sold off almost everything they had to pay their debt. All they had left was the van and a few personal belongings. So they expected to live in my house rent-free for the foreseeable future. They were working too. Both of them soon got a new job. My father was a delivery driver and my mother a sales associate. They were making money and the only things they contributed was electricity and water. which was basically just handing me a $100 bill every month and saying I should be grateful they were paying me anything. Anytime I tried to discuss proper rent with them, they just said I owed it to them to live rent-free because I took 18 years of their life. And it's not like they were demanding the money back for that time. Then threatened to stop helping with the utilities altogether. I was so at my wit's end, I ended up calling my grandparents and explaining the situation to them. They were very unhappy and spoke with my parents. But my parents still said they had rights to stay and they had not sold the house. My parents would have invaded. I told him not to worry. I'd already filed for a legal eviction and would get it soon enough. And my parents already knew that they were on borrowed time. I made sure to say that in earshot of my parents too. They responded with a silent treatment. My father was always most of the time driving a delivery vehicle, like 6 days a week, which was a job really not to his liking. And my mother basically tried to take over my house in her spare time. She demanded I let her rearrange the living room, and even tried to force me to give her and my father the master bedroom, because they were my parents and they deserved better, as she put it. I vetoed both of those things and said they don't even deserve this, and to stop trying to act like I owe them anything. I didn't even ask to be born, and it's a normal obligation for parents to raise their freaking children. And all they were trying to do is assert dominance on me to try to keep me from kicking them out. Finally, after 4 months and now into early 2021, I managed to take my parents to court over their squatting. We only needed to go to the court because they fought the eviction and tried to gaslight me into rescinding it. They tried to use the fact it was formerly my grandparents' house and the fact that they were giving me $100 a month as some sort of leverage of residency. But there was no real rental agreement, and they were smart enough not to try and forge one, as that would have been fraud. So the judge ordered that they need to be out in a maximum of 30 days, because they have zero claim to the house. After court, they confronted me and said they were disappointed in me for kicking out my own flesh and blood. I could not help but laugh and called them hypocrites, because that's exactly what they did to me without a care in the world for my well-being. They had no love for me, so I have no love for them. I owed them nothing. They just tried to act like everything was mine as theirs, but they had no right to call themselves my parents because they never acted like it anyways. I called them a pair of snobby, lying narcissists to their faces, and told them to get their affairs in order. Because, well, they already know I won't hesitate to call the police if they don't leave the premises within 30 days. My father looked enraged, but my mother stopped him from saying or doing anything by grabbing his shoulder and shaking her head. He sneered at me and walked away. They left, but not without a lot of tension. That final month was spent with them either guilting me to try and change my mind or completely ignoring me. I put up a calendar in the living room and checked off each day before they had to leave with a big fat red marker. And the exact day they were to be out was marked with a big red circle. I still remember that final day was March 2nd. My parents waited until the exact day they had to leave my home for good before they finally left. Even when all their stuff was out of the house, they were sleeping on the floor in the guest room for a few days. Since they were so convinced they could make me let them stay, they did not bother to try to look for an apartment until after the court eviction went through. And my mother spent weeks scrambling to find one. They had to get a tiny and crappy studio apartment in the next city over, because, well, it was the only thing they could afford in such short notice. A lot like what I had to do when I was 18. Quite ironic. I drove my mother over to see it once, and the apartment was terrible. The walls were barely barf green. The carpet looked like it was 20 years old. The only window just had a view of a brick wall outside, and there was no dishwasher. The stove was the smallest stove I've ever seen, and the toilet looked like it really needed to be replaced. The walls also did little to stop noise from neighbors. There was already 2 people loudly fighting in the adjacent apartment while we were there. My mother went out of her way to try to give me sad looks while dropping hints that I should be feeling guilty. I was reducing them to live in such a place. I just acted oblivious to it all until she finally stopped. They signed the lease right away and moved what little stuff they had into the apartment over the weekend. They also ended up demanding the queen-size bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV from my guest room. I told them just take the damn things because I no longer wanted them in my house, after they spent 5 months sleeping in that room. They looked at me like I was treating them as though they were diseased and demanded nothing more. The moment they had to leave for good, I started changing the locks on all the doors. All their stuff was at the apartment, and they spent their last night in my guest room. They watched me started ripping the old locks off the front doors they were getting in the van. They said nothing, I said nothing, but they just sat and watched me for a while until I had the new doorknob on. Then they finally left, and I breathed a massive sigh of relief the second that van went down the road. I figured karma had finally come for them, and they could live under a rock for all I cared. But nope, my grandparents heard from them recently. They called them to brag that they had a new business similar to their old one, in the same state I'm living in now. And they're basically on track to be right back to where they used to be in life prior to the pandemic, which was making great money and looking down on others. I've already Googled their new business, and it seems like it's doing well. They may have many positive reviews and everything. I'm pretty freaking resentful, truth to be told. They put me through being homeless, squatted for next to free at my house for months, then went right back to being the snobby, wine-drinking business people they used to be. If karma's real, it's taking way too damn long. Alright guys, so if this story was real, it's safe to say that was insane. Seems like OP's parents are very vile humans. There was some serious cause for concern about security. A lot of OP people who saw the story's original thread, they're thinking these parents might come back for some sort of petty revenge. One of the comments was about security and how to handle it, and the comment says, "Please get cameras that cover every inch of your home and property. You need to be able to prove if they break in, damage your stuff, or whatever. These are cruel people, and I'm sure they're vindictive. They won't hesitate to damage your property and to make you suffer for not taking care of them, your oh so dear parents." Alright guys, so I do agree with that. I think OP definitely needs some cameras. Let me know your thoughts on it in the comment section below. The final story on the day. Am I the a-hole for making my daughter choose who she wants to walk down the aisle? I have a 22-year-old daughter, Chloe. Her mom and I were never married. Because of circumstances that I could not be in her life for long, then, her mom got married when she was 5 to her stepdad, who is somewhat of a decent guy. Nosy, but decent. I came back to the country when Chloe was 16. She was open to the idea of rebuilding our relationship, though her mom always throws in my face that Chloe's stepdad is, quote, the real legal parent, and has always been to Chloe, but she knows about the bond I have with Chloe, or the things I've gone through in the past, so I ignore her judgmental remarks. Chloe's getting married come February. I was taken back when she told me she was considering having me and her stepdad walk her down the aisle. I went to have a conversation with her to talk about how uncomfortable I was with this idea. She talked about how her stepdad played a huge part in her life, and how she wanted to honor that by including him. I told her, of course, and I absolutely won't invalidate her feelings or deny how much of a good influence her stepdad's been. But I just don't feel comfortable with it, and told her it'd be okay if I was just a guest there. But she said she wants me to be part of this really bad. I said it's either me or her stepdad because there's no way I'm doing this with him. She thought that it was petty, but it wasn't. She got upset, saying it was not okay for me to put her in the position and make her choose and force her hand. She complained about how I was ruining her wedding and making it about my resentment towards her stepdad. The argument escalated to the point where I said I will not come to the wedding if she continues to force the issue. Her mom contacted me, calling me selfish, jealous, spiteful, and whatnot, claiming I was willing to hurt Chloe's feelings out of spite, just because she dared show appreciation for the man who stepped up and was more than a parent than I'll ever be. I told her, quote, "Stay out of it. You're the reason we're having this problem. Stay out of this between me and Chloe." Chloe's not answering my phone calls. I tried speaking to her fiancé, and he said Chloe is upset by the fact that I put my feelings above hers, and disrespected her stepdad by asking her to choose between us. He advised me to do this one thing for her since it's important, but I'm feeling uneasy, even thinking about it. So I don't think I'll ever be okay with it. Okay, so I'm just going to say, in the comment section of the original thread, I'd say 99.9 infinite are saying how OP's father is an absolute a-hole. OP's father was not even around, and he's daring to demand such a thing. Here's one of the comments. "You are the a-hole. You're gone the vast majority of her life so far, and she still wants to include you in her wedding. Even though you did not raise her, and your response to that is to make it about yourself." Well, now that the comment puts it that way, I totally agree. Let me know what you think about this, or how maybe you would have handled the situation. Drop it down below in the comment section. That's all the stories I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Subscribe for daily videos. Have a wonderful night.